Haiku, the shortest form of poetry in the world, going back over 1,200 years. It reflects the seasons and the emotions within. Photographs capture that one single moment. The two work together to create a new form of visual literature called Photo Haiku. Dag Hammarskjöld was the Secretary General of the United Nations 60 years ago when Japan became a member. It was discovered after his death that he had written 110 Swedish haiku in his diary. He also took many photographs with poetic sensibility. Haiku may have served as a refuge from his busy, everyday life. This fall, the United Nations University in Tokyo invited Kai Falkman, Honorary President of the Swedish Haiku Society and a haiku poet himself, to speak about Hammarskjöld, his photos, and the haiku which he had written. Falkman is the founder of the Swedish Haiku Society, carrying on the legacy that Hammarskjöld left behind as he worked to spread haiku throughout his country. Traveling around the world as a diplomat, Falkman has written many haiku. Today, Michio Nakahara will have a conversation with Kai Falkman, Ambassador, Honorary President of the Swedish Haiku Society and haiku poet.
It is very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Please sit down. We are here today in the courtyard of the Embassy of Sweden, located in the middle of Tokyo. Being here, it is like experiencing a small piece of Northern Europe.
I can say I'm happy about that, yes, yes.
The location today is the Embassy of Sweden. The architectural design is representative of traditional Swedish aesthetics. It features Falun Red paint made with a dye which originated in the Falun mines and was used on wooden cottages and barns as a protection from corrosion. The color is representative of traditional Swedish houses.
Mr. Hammarskjöld was Secretary General of the United Nations 60 years ago when Japan became a member. But nobody knew that he took photographs and wrote haiku.
It came as a very big surprise, and it was inserted in his private diary called Vägmärken, Waymarks. And that was the greatest surprise. The translator, Auden, said that Hammarskjöld wrote haiku. It was a very great surprise to everybody.
Why was Hammarskjöld able to take interest in haiku, one of the shortest forms of poetry?
Hammarskjöld's poems were rather from the start, before he was interested in haiku, they were very, very short and to the point, you know. So there was a kind of, shall we say, familiarity with the sense of haiku already from the start. And secondly, he wrote haiku because there was a kind of certain distance to the subject. You know. He wanted to write about his childhood with very clear images, but a distance to his father, for instance, also a distance to his mother, but sort of making a very warm picture of her.
The three-line format, Fusokufuri, where the haiku is not just a description of the photo, and seasonality are our three guidelines. Our haiku masters will now discuss and select the Haiku Master of the Month from all of the submissions we received from around the world.
Here is the first photo haiku.
Sand bubbler crab, somewhere between the pellets, waning moon.
This is quite an interesting visual. The first word that draws my attention is, of course, the sand bubbler crab. It's not a very large crab, and I've heard that it lives in a hole that is about 10 to 20 centimeters deep. With its legs or with its claws, I think it eats organic substances and plankton from the bottom of the sea and spits out little balls of sand. And after repeating that, it perhaps accidentally created this spiral shape in the sand. In Japan, it has been said that crabs and the moon have a friendly relationship, and this photo haiku has touched upon it in an interesting way.
Yes, I think it's very interesting what you say. When I look at this photo, of course, and see the haiku, I don't see that the haiku is a description of the photo, which is a good thing. It is not a description, but it makes this sort of reference to the moon of this sort of round drawing in the sand, and that is a very good kind of, shall we say, association. I think there is a weakness in it because he says somewhere between the pellets, and then you don't see it clearly, and the haiku should be more clear.
Perhaps the Swedish poets do not like abstract words or concepts in haiku, but interestingly enough, the Japanese actually prefer a word like somewhere because it leaves room for imagination. It allows for each individual to interpret the haiku in their own way. So there is not right or wrong here, but what I can say is that abstract concepts are at the core of Japanese aesthetics. I think there are many Japanese who think that way. Let's see the next one.
Entities, shadows picked one by one from the vicissitude of time.
The photograph is quite mysterious. It makes me wonder if this place actually exists. The second line, shadows picked one by one, interests me the most. People are all headed in the same direction, which is to their inevitable death, but the paths that they take differ with the choices that they make. This is true with all people around the world, and so I feel a strong sense of fate from the photo haiku. The sentiment is expressed effectively in the photograph.
It's a very interesting point there. I think I agree with you that the second line is the most interesting line, and it has a certain reference also to the picture. And the picture is very intriguing, and it's mysterious picture. First I thought that the text should be an explanation of what happens in the picture, but it's difficult to see this. And also I think a word like entities, you cannot use that in a haiku because it's too abstract. I don't see what entities is. The entities are the bodies, of course. And also, as you mentioned, the word vicissitude of time, that is not sort of a text in a haiku.
Let's see the next one from Malaysia.
City stress, turning on the tap just to hear the water flow.
This photograph is most definitely a piece of everyday life, but the overall theme of this work is about city stress. These words set the tone and theme of this photo haiku. It makes you wonder, where does this water come from? What is the journey that this water took to get here to the big stressful city? Some will likely imagine the origin of the water, where it came from, which is nature. Perhaps it came from a river, a mountain, or a lake. With that picture in mind, I can understand how running tap water in the big city could give you comfort as if you were surrounded by nature.
Of course, city stress, it's very easy to imagine. Sort of a lot of cars, a lot of people running, you know, and kind of nervous atmosphere. That is good. And then, but on the first line, you should put down turning on the tap in the second line, because there shouldn't be two pictures confronting each other already in the beginning. And then you could take away just to here, because that is an explanation that is not needed. And therefore, if you say only city stress, turning on the tap, the water flows. The water is flowing. Then you have this sort of contrast between the city stress and the nervosity of the city, etc. And then you see the beautiful flow of water in the final. So there is this contradiction between two scenes, which is good for a haiku. I think that the best sort of haiku photo would be three photos. First, the scene. Secondly, the action, and thirdly, the surprise. So you could have three photos like that, and you could sort of understand the, shall we say, haiku form and the haiku content of this. These three elements are very important in haiku. And if you look, the Americans say that there is no story in haiku. This is wrong, because there is a story in every haiku.
Yes, haiku is said to capture the moment, a moment seen through the filter of your soul, and it tells many stories. It stimulates your senses with sound, smell, and even texture. That is the beauty of haiku.
Haiku started to spread around the world 100 years ago, and there are haiku societies in over 70 countries today. It is said that haiku gradually gained recognition throughout Sweden about 50 years ago.
I heard that you came to Japan for the first time in 1959, and that you have photographs that you took back then.
Memories from Japan.
It's beautiful.
This was sort of this Roppongi area, Asabu. This was my quarter in here. And here was the Swedish embassy, same place.
Was it around 1959 in Japan when you first encountered haiku?
Yes. It was my teacher. I took lessons in Japanese, and he came one day with haiku poems. And he said it's a good way to learn Japanese by looking at haiku, because the same words sort of are used very often in haiku, like ike, niwa, kumo, etc., etc. So this was a good way to remember these words, you know, and I got interested in haiku.
Can you present to us one of your haiku which you wrote during that time?
I think my first haiku was written when I came to Kyoto, and it was in wintertime. And then I had this sort of impression of Kinkakuji. Kinkakuji, crackings of gold in the eyes.
You captured Kinkakuji in an interesting way.
And that is what I liked in Japanese haiku. It was the surprise at the end, the transformation of the image.
I heard that basho was one of the reasons why you took such a strong interest in haiku.
What impressed me very much about basho, it was how he could change between sound and vision. And in the same poem, like this world-famous poem about the old pond, the frog jumps in, the sound of water. First is a visual scene, and then you don't see what happens in the water, but you have to imagine it.
The Japanese word shinji comes to mind. It means the ear of the soul. Basho heard sounds that you couldn't hear, and he also visualized sounds that you actually could not hear. For example, the sound of water seeping into the rocks. I would guess that these are the expressions which captured your imagination.
In 1999, Falkman established the Swedish Haiku Society to promote haiku within his country, and in order to deepen the relationship with Japan, Falkman published April Snow, which introduces 200 poems, 100 by Swedish haiku poets and 100 by Japanese poets.
Please.
Did you run into any difficulties when making this book?
And I sent the Swedish text to Japan, and they said, yes, it's acceptable, but there is no kigo. You must have seasons. And I got very shocked, you know, because we had only a few weeks left. So I looked at the text, and then it was much easier than I thought, because we had winter poems, spring poems, summer poems, and autumn poems, more or less divided equally, but most winter poems and summer poems. So I sort of put them in different seasons and sent it back to Japan and said, perfect, all right.
December today. Fashion House shows winter, its collection. Sun is gone, the shadow of the fence, left in white frost on the grass.
What are the important elements in Swedish haiku?
But I think it's difficult to say exactly what the most important elements are, but I think that it's elements of nature. Transformation periods are very important, because then they are longing for summer when they see sort of the first flower. And then there's this long time longing for something like that. And therefore Swedish people are very much longing to a new season or something else. We are longing for summer the whole year, and for the light and the warmth, etc., etc. And this is very strongly expressed in Swedish poetry.
After a long winter, the Japanese anticipate the arrival of spring. It is a strong feeling that is probably similar to that of the Swedish people, and it inspires our haiku too.
Thank you for your haiku submissions for our photo of the month. The photo of the month is of this hosta plant. Let's see the selected submissions for this month. Like souls gathering, waiting their time for rebirth, flowers prepare to bloom. Cricket song, so lonely in the backyard, and them by millions. Belated news, mom's flowers, warmer than her hands. Here is a photo haiku by Falkman. Up with the curtain, dawn rolling in, dark, lighter, red. At the brink of dawn, he rolled up the curtain and he saw the sunlight reflect off the ground and into the sky, creating a beautiful gradation of color. Open field. A fly lands on my finger and studies me intently. Empty house. Silence speaks to me about my father. Tongariro crossing. Out of the clouds. Issa's ant trail. We're looking for haiku masters from around the world. Please submit your photo haiku through our website.
Let's see the next photo haiku from Japan.
Memory of the cyclone, drifting between the coconut trees.
I would imagine that from the perspective of Sweden, this photograph must seem quite exotic, a faraway land.
It's a beautiful photograph with the clouds behind, the darkness in the front, a silhouette of a memory, yes.
You do not see the cyclone in the photograph, and so you must imagine that the cyclone has already passed.
It's very difficult to use the word memory, because then memory is very abstract, you know. And I mean, haiku is very much about presence, the presence of, America say the haiku moment, the presence of the view is very important.
The word memory often appears in Japanese haiku as well. I personally prefer not to use the word in haiku. It is a bit too abstract. What is interesting about this haiku is that it took a word like memory, which you cannot see, and made it as if you can see it, weaving through the coconut trees. I commend the author for doing this.
Well, apropos memory, every haiku is a memory. Either if you write it 5 minutes after you experienced the haiku moment, so to say, or as Hammarskjöld, you write it 20, 30, 40 years afterwards, or it's also a memory, you know. So each haiku is a memory. You don't need to explain this in words.
Here is the next one.
Handcraft shop. Thinking of divorce. I put back the brittle teapot.
The photograph appears to be a photograph of a painting. The haiku is dramatically distant from the photograph. In haiku terms, it is like sandangire, where each of the 3 lines are distinctly different, but still unified within the haiku.
When I see the photo, I don't understand what it depicts. It's a beautiful photo, and I wonder what it is. Then I read the haiku, and I see the word thinking. Aha! I think this perhaps is a description of the synapses in the brain. You know, because each sort of cell has a meaning, and then there is a kind of a time schedule in it and a connection, you know. But now here it's a disconnection, because it's a disconnection to the husband or to the wife, I don't know. But of course you feel that she puts back the teapot because it reminds her of the husband. It's much easier if you have a concrete image of why she is thinking of this husband.
The blue overtone makes it seem a bit sad, But I think there is optimism in this. The wife thinks about divorce, but she sees her husband, who is devastated, and decides to put him back in the same place. Perhaps this repetitive cycle is what being married is all about, not parting ways at the end. And here is where I sense the optimism.
But I have a solution to this haiku, namely the following. Handcraft shop, I put back the brittle teapot that we used to share. Then you understand there is a divorce situation, you know. Perhaps you can write it shorter. Handcraft shop, putting back the brittle teapot we used to share.
I learned today that the Swedes prefer to communicate with concrete images. It is quite different from the aesthetic preference of the Japanese people, who like things to be abstract and gray.
The Haiku Masters will now select the Haiku Master of the Month. Sand bubbler crab, somewhere between the pellets, waning moon.
Photographs provide a limited view, but I think it makes it more interesting if there is an element of mystery to keep people guessing. The waning moon is at the opposite end of this spiral design, which is drawn on the ground. This extreme distance is what I believe made this photograph into a powerful image.
This is the interesting connection between this which is alive and which is not alive. You know, there's still this sort of consistent. And you have this sort of interconnection in this haiku and in this picture. And it has a sort of very wide sense of meaning. And that is why I like it. This is interesting because this shows really we choose the same haiku and picture, but from different perspectives. So therefore it means that sort of haiku is sort of global in a very nice sense.
Did you enjoy yourself in the discussions we had today?
I see the difference between sort of our way of thinking, your way of thinking, but still there is a connection which is very, very important. I think it has been a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot from you, Sensei.